Chapter 64, The Hero. Back in the tower, Tress was still a captive. It was humiliating, yes, but somehow also gratifying in that it was the way she had expected what she had expected to happen. From the moment she'd launched from the rock, she'd anticipated grand failure. She had gone not because she assumed she would succeed, but because something had to be done. And though many things had gone wrong on her quest, she'd somehow always managed to make them go right, too. She'd found her repeated success almost uncomfortably consistent. In the same way that if you keep rolling sixes, you start to worry that something is wrong with the dice. Failing here, getting captured, being immobilized, and unable to help, well, she wasn't happy about it, but a part of her was relieved. It had finally happened, as it should have. She wasn't a king's mask or a pirate. She was a window washer with hair that really needed to be pulled back into its tail because she could barely see through it at the moment. Unfortunately, the sorceress's bonds had locked her hands in those glowing bands of light pressed to the wall. Through her hair, she was able to watch the sorceress's annoyance as cannons completely immobilized her troops. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had designed the men to withstand cannon fire. She'd designed them to be unstoppable. They could march right out into the ocean and even had grappling hooks that would let them climb aboard ships, often spearing them from underneath, first puncturing the hulls. They were impervious to basically every weapon available to a pre-industrial culture. Fearsome, destructive, deadly. They didn't know what to do about vines, though. Even a semi-self-aware construct like an awakened soldier relies on its instructions. They're far more versatile than something running on a traditional computer program, but they're also not fully alive, and these, confronted by vines holding them down, were baffled. Their instructions told them not to be afraid of weapons brandished by interlopers, so they kept trying to march forward. The cannonballs continued to explode around them, causing more vines to spring out. When immobilized, the metal men had instructions to call for support. Normally, that was a valid line of programming. In this case, though, it sent the entire group into chaos. They'd alternate from trying to march on the ship to trying to free one another, to locking up as they tried to decide what to do when neither was possible. In short, the cannonballs worked. Blessed moons, they worked. Despite her situation, Tress couldn't help grinning as she saw her designs incapacitating an entire legion of supposedly unstoppable foes. Charlie climbed up her leg, clinging to her trousers as a cat crawled below. He was puffing from exertion. I'm having a little trouble with the beast. It's all right, Charlie, Tress said, still watching the cannon fire. Hey, he said, don't you cry. There's a maritime law against that. Sorry, she said. Another cannonball exploded, vines reaching out like some unholy hybrid of an octopus and a bag of lawn clippings. It's just, they're beautiful. A short time later, the crew was on shore, running past the immobilized troops. Fort leading the charge and carrying me overboard. I'll pretend it was in a dignified fashion. But if Charlie didn't open the door, they'd be trapped outside the tower and the story would end there. Tress looked at Charlie. I'm sorry. That in the end, we got captured. It's like we said this would happen, right? Isn't it? He nodded, but Tress, he said, I remember another part of that conversation. Something about shining armor. I don't think they make armor in rat size, Charlie. Charlie saw something on the floor. His eyes narrowed. Distractor, he said. Then he drew upon every ounce of courage he had remaining. It wasn't much, but when you're such a small body, courage, like booze, goes further than you'd expect. Charlie leaped. The cat gave chase immediately, bearing down on him as he dashed for something lying on the floor near the stairs. The large pewter tankard. The sorceress was turning her attention to the tower's defenses. She might well have figured out what was happening if Tress hadn't done as Charlie asked. Sorceress, she said, have you heard those stories about the fair maiden who gets captured? Thinking about your fate, the sorcerer said, never one to pass on inflicting a little misery. Thinking about how you traveled all this way only to end up in chains? Yes, Tress said, and thinking that, well, it's not that bad, actually. Not that bad, the sorcerer said, stalking forward, ignoring the clinking sound from behind, like something metal going down the steps. Dear, you're powerless. You wanted to save your love, but you can't even save your own self. You thought yourself a powerful pirate, yet here you are. At the end of your quest, you've ended up like every girl from any story, needing to be rescued. Freeze that moment. Imagine it. Charlie the rat, spinning in the air within a pewter cup, bouncing down the stairs, observed by a bemused cat from above, who'd given the swat that sent the cup tumbling. Fort, Anne, and Soleil reaching the tower with me hoisted high overhead. Tress, bound by glowing bonds, held to the wall, confident. Those stories always leave something out, Tress said. It's really not a problem that someone needs to be saved. Everyone needs help. It's hard to be the person who makes trouble, but the thing is, everyone makes trouble. How would we help anyone if nobody ever needed help? And you, the sorcerer said, starting to draw runes in the air, you're going to have quite the curse. I'll tell you, I've been saving this one for a special occasion. You will spend the next several decades in misery, child. Down below, a tiny voice echoed up from the hallway. Magic door, please open. The part stories leave out, Tress said, as the sorcerer's runes formed into a vibrant wall, is everything that comes before. You see, I've discovered that it's all right to need help, so long as you've lived your life as the kind of person who deserves to be rescued. The sorceress released her curse, a blast of light and energy meant to enwrap Tress and transform her. Instead, the runes exploded in a blinding shower of light, filling the room with white energy that momentarily blotted out all possible sensation. When it faded, I stood between Tress and the sorceress, with the key officers of the Crow's Song behind me and a little rat on my shoulder. My hands pressed forward, having created an invested shield of light to shelter Tress. It was constructed of aeons, which could now draw. The mechanics might bore you. The results, though, were spectacular. I was wearing a floral buttoned shirt, shorts that were way too short, and sandals with socks. Hello, Raina, I said. I hope your last few years have been exactly as lovely as you are. And that is what it looked like. And that is the tower going away when we find out how that happened. She lowered her jaw, her hands. She lowered her hands, jaw dropping. Why, yes, I said, gesturing to my current clothing. I do know this outfit is awful. I realized one should never bring up politics at dinner with one's in-laws, and I know that you, my dear, are living proof that someone doesn't need to be the least bit funny to be an utter clown. A deep glow pulsed beneath my skin. Finally. It turns out that to get this particular set of powers to work, you couldn't simply fake connection. You needed an invitation and adoption into a very select group. My only chance had been to find one smart enough to be a member of that group, stupid enough for me to toy with, and sadistic enough to trade membership for the opportunity to see me cursed. Damn you, she muttered. My curse was broken, my senses restored. She could see it as easily as I could. I'd won. Excellent work, cabin boy, Tress said, still attached to the wall. We're going to have to promote you after this. Wait, we won? Soleil asked. Hoyd, you're, what are you? The term sorcerer will do, I told her. I have won our bet. Wait, Charlie said from my shoulder. It was really a bet? You let her curse you for a simple bet? Please, I said, was anything about what we just did simple? The sorceress waved her hand, dropping Tress from the wall. Go, she said, before I change my mind. Fort helped Tress as she stumbled and stood, and she nodded in thanks. Then she turned to the sorceress. First, she said, end Charlie's curse. I can't, the sorceress said. I can't break the curse unless the terms are met. It's impossible. Tress looked to me. There were ways, but the sorceress probably wasn't capable of them. So I nodded. It was true enough. Tress took a deep breath and looked back at the sorceress, her face becoming like steel. We're not leaving, Tress said. You are. Excuse me, the sorceress snapped. You've cursed people who only wanted to talk to you, Tress said. You've taken prisoners, robbed merchants, and destroyed fleets. You are a scourge upon the sea. This planet, she drew herself up partially to intimidate the side of her that was shocked by her own audacity. I demand that you leave this world, go away, and never return. Oh, please, the sorceress said. Who are you to make demands of me? In response, Soleil and Fort pulled pistols on her and somehow got out 3 at once. Charlie growled. It wasn't very intimidating, but it made him feel good to contribute. Tress didn't bother with a gun. She nudged me. Cabin boy, she said. Zapper or something. You're giving me orders, I said softly. You're on my crew, aren't you? She said. At least she had the good graces to blush about it. I sighed and, as ordered, stepped forward and raised my hands. I met the sorceress's eyes and knew what she was thinking. She, like most of her kind, was very good at something we call risk-reward projections. She'd come to this planet because nothing here could threaten her, and she'd fought a dragon living here. Then I'd arrived. She might have been able to beat me, curse me again, but she might not have been able to, even if the odds were only 1 in 5 that she'd lose. You didn't live long by frequently taking 1 in 5 chances that you'll die. And Rihanna had lived a very, very long time. A short time later, we all stood on the deck of the Crow Song, looking up at the twinkling speck of light as it vanished in the sky. The tower was gone, taking the sorceress with it. I have that effect on people. Stay around too long, and you'll inevitably envy those who have never met me. Behind us, the Dugs started to whoop and cheer. Fort rolled out something wonderful to drink, which he'd been saving for such an occasion, and decided their cannons needed names, much to Lager's lamentation. Soleil put her hand to her pocket, the letter from her father, and suffered it all for now. She even let herself enjoy the celebration. Tress stepped up to me, holding Charlie, who was still a rat. Is there nothing you can do? She asked. No way to break the curse? Both of them looked at me with hope in their eyes. I can't undo the curse, I said. Not at my current skill with the arts. No one can. Oh, Charlie said. But perhaps, I said, inspecting the ruins, I can make out surrounding him. I can change the parameters a little. Epilogue. 5 months later, a ship arrived at the rock that was not a rock. That ship bumped the docks as it slowed, on account of its new apprentice helmsman being inexperienced. Soleil's father looked chagrined, but Soleil merely smiled and gave him a few pointers. The ship was not the Crow's Song. The crew had decided that a fresh start would help them in their new lives, and besides, the captain had wanted a few extra cabins. So after receiving their pardons, they'd sold the old ship and bought a new one with a brand new name. The captain soon emerged onto the deck of the Two Cups, sporting a long captain's jacket and a hat with a plume. She made a few hand signs toward the helm, some of the ones Fort had been teaching the crew. Turns out, it's handy for multiple reasons to be able to communicate with signs on ship. Because you can talk to the sailors on the rigging or give direction to the helm without needing to yell over the sounds of spores or wind. In this case, she congratulated the apprentice helmsman on his first steer into port, bumps notwithstanding. After that, Tress walked to the rail and took a sip from her cup, one with a butterfly, which she had obviously glued back together after being shattered into many pieces. The captain didn't mind the breaks. Cups with chips, or dings, or even the cracks had stories. She particularly liked the one this cup told. The dockmaster and dock inspector arrived, and Soleil soon presented them with quite the royal writ detailing the important nature of this vessel. Single-handedly stopping the sorceress had earned Tress and the crew a tad more than a pardon. Plus, there was a matter of their exclusive ability to trade through the Crimson and Midnight Seas, opening new opportunities with once distant seas. Every person on that ship would, within a few years, become fantastically wealthy. I knew them when they were all just Dougs. The king had, of course, insisted that he'd always intended for this to happen, that he'd believed in Charlie and his chosen bride from the beginning. If that sounds like hypocrisy to you, well, we prefer to call it politics. While the dockmaster and inspector were rereading the writ, Charlie finally emerged on deck, fully human again. The curse had said he needed to bring the person he loved most to the sorceress's home to be cursed in exchange for freedom. My modifications allowed him instead to bring the person he loved to her home to be versed in exchange for his freedom. A good, sensible, non-slant rhyme. Tress had left her cabin at his request so he could transform in private. Now he strode out, holding the poem he'd written for her, a stupid grin on his face. She loved that one. Also, the only thing he was wearing was a tiny pirate hat. As he stepped up beside her, she leaned in. "Love," she whispered. "Clothing. Humans wear clothing." He looked down. "That's going to take some getting used to," he said. Excuse me. Yes, they stayed together. The two of them had both been changed by their journeys, but in complementary ways. Tress remained the captain and expert sprouter, while Charlie turned to be an extraordinarily capable valet and passable ship storyteller and musician, a well-versed man indeed. With a few tips, he wasn't so boring after all. Secretly, I'll tell you that you aren't either. Anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to lower your value. Don't trust them. They know they can't afford you otherwise. The crew began to climb from the ship, excited for some shore leave, even if it was on the rock. They all made an appearance except for Laggard, who was currently in the brig for starting a bar fight at the last port. You'll be happy to know that, as I've kept track of the crew over the years, even he has shown some growth. It's beginning to look like, instead of following his family's tradition of being an unpleasant snarl of misery until you get yourself killed, he's on track to do, well, basically anything else. As Charlie was getting dressed, Tress read his poem, the verse that broke the curse. "It is only for her I'm sorry." Once she looked up, she spotted something exhilarating. Her parents were stumbling down toward the docks, her little brother in tow. Tress's mother had spent most nights since she'd left watching the sea for any signs, but with the eventual letters Tress had been able to send, she hadn't quite believed Tress would return. Neither of them had until she saw her standing there. Tress strode down onto the dock and then onto the once familiar stone ground, salty and black. Odd how foreign the place felt. How could something feel both familiar and foreign? As her family arrived to embrace her, though, she discovered that it was exquisitely familiar, not foreign in the least. They'd brought their luggage, and their cabin was ready. She ushered them toward the ship, but was interrupted as the Duke arrived at last. Red-faced, bearing a scowl, he had only one. Tress said he had the only one. Tress had decided, for while you needed a smile for every occasion, a scowl needed no variety. "What is this?" he said, slapping the written hand. "What have you done?" "I've rescued your son, the real one, not the walking chin with the 6-word vocabulary." "I meant, what have you done to the island?" the Duke said, gesturing at the king's word. "Anyone can leave if they want. The island will soon be completely depopulated." Read the next part, she said, and took a sip of her tea, then walked off, not waiting for him. He had to read it several times to put it together. The king had proclaimed that a generous stipend would be paid to anyone who lived and worked on the rock for 20 years. If you're so lucky as to get a job on Diggins Point, you'll retire with a sizable nest egg. But be warned, positions there are hard to come by these days. No one wants to leave. The beer is great, the company passable, and the pay, well, it makes up for the rest. Tress stepped back onto the deck of her ship, meeting newly betrothed Charlie. She stood down toward his father on the dock. Want to say hello? No, thank you, Charlie said. Did you leave Mother's letter? The Duchess, it should be noted, had moved away from the island and more importantly from her husband several months before. Turns out that abandoning your only son to certain doom is not a path to a healthy marriage. It's in the stack, Tress said. He'll find it, assuming he bothers to keep reading. Ah, look, he's scowling again. Life is easier for him that way, Charlie said. He only has to maintain one expression. He wrapped his arms around her and put his head on her shoulder. It's going to be annoying to no longer have fun, but the other perks are certainly going to outweigh that loss. I wonder, she said idly, resting her hand on his as he held her, if there's a maritime law against a captain dating her valet. What will people say? They will say, he replied softly, what a lucky, lucky man he is. They didn't stay long, just long enough to gather some supplies for Tress to give another thanks to those who had helped her escape all those months ago. And then the ship left to sail the ocean with a girl and a rat on board. The rat, it turns out, was not actually a rat in more ways than one. The girl, as you may have discovered, was not actually a girl. She was 7 ways a woman, regardless of her age. The ocean, however, was now, as you hopefully imagine it, assuming you imagine it as emerald green, made up of spores, and bearing endless possibilities. The end.